Imagine this. A rope bridge swaying violently over a raging canyon river in 1887 Colorado. An aging Comanche warrior dangling by his scarred hands, seconds from death. And the only person who can save him is a white widow who has already lost everything to the frontier's cruelty. Sarah Hawthorne never thought she'd risk her life for a stranger, especially one from a world that once terrified her people. But in that heart-stopping moment, she reaches out. What she doesn't know is that the man she pulls from the abyss carries a secret betrayal darker than any storm on the high plains. And it will force both of them to confront enemies, ghosts, and a bond neither ever expected. This story ends in a way that has left millions in tears and speechless for days. Stay until the final minute. You won't regret it. If you're here, hit subscribe, drop a like, and comment where you're watching from. Let's see how far this tale reaches across the world. Now, let's ride into the dust. The wind cut sharply across the high plains of southwestern Colorado in the fall of 1887, carrying the dry scent of sage and the faint echo of a river far below. Sarah Hawthorne rode alone, as she had every evening for years, her weathered duster flapping against the saddle, the old mare picking its way along the rutted trail that skirted the canyon rim. The sun hung low, bleeding orange over the jagged San Juan peaks, and the ranch house waited ahead, small, squat, silent. No smoke rose from the chimney. No lamp glowed in the window. Just the creak of leather and the steady clop of hooves, sounds that had become her only company since the fever took her husband and 2 boys on the Oregon Trail 2 decades back. She was past 50 now, hair gone iron gray beneath her hat, hands calloused from rope and rifle. Folks in Durango called her the widow on the ridge, left her be. Sarah preferred it that way. The house held too many ghosts, the boys' laughter that no longer bounced off the log walls, her husband's low voice calling her name at dusk. She kept the place tidy, the stock fed, the rifle oiled. Nothing more. Grief had carved her hollow, and the hollow had become home. That evening, the wind carried something else, a low, splintering crack, like old timber giving way under a weight it was never meant to bear. Sarah reined in, head turning toward the canyon. Another crack, sharper, followed by a grunt of effort, human and strained. She nudged the mare forward, down the switchback trail that dropped toward the Animas River Gorge. The old mining bridge came into view, a swaying skeleton of hemp rope and weathered planks thrown across the chasm years ago to haul ore carts, now abandoned and rotting. Most folks took the long way around these days. Sarah rarely crossed it herself. She saw him then, halfway across, body dangling beneath the fractured walkway. A man, broad-shouldered even in desperation, his dark braids swinging as he fought to hold on. His fingers, thick with old scars, clamped around a single frayed rope, while his boots kicked above the roaring whitewater 200 feet below. Blood streaked the wood where his grip had torn skin away. The bridge groaned again, another plank snapping free and tumbling into the void. Sarah's breath caught. She had seen death before, slow in fevered wagons, sudden in ambushes, but never like this. Never hanging by a thread over the same kind of drop that haunted her nightmares. Memories flashed, her husband reaching for her on a rain-slick bridge years ago, his hand slipping away as the planks gave. She had not been fast enough then. She kicked the mare hard, galloping the last yards to the bridgehead, leaping down before the animal fully stopped. The structure shuddered under her boots as she ran out onto it, rope sides whipping in the wind. She dropped to her belly near the break, peering over. The man's dark eyes met hers, fierce, unyielding, even as exhaustion dragged at him. Comanche she knew at once from the braid, the high cheekbones, the old lance scars visible on his forearms. A warrior, old but unbroken. "Hold on!" she called, voice steady despite the hammering in her chest. She yanked the coiled lariat from her saddle horn, shook out a loop, and lowered it fast. His arms trembled violently now, knuckles white. Another rope strand popped with a sound like a rifle shot. Sarah leaned farther out, ignoring the sway that threatened to pitch her after him. The loop settled over his shoulders. "Grab it. Pull it tight." He managed to work one arm through, then the other, cinching it beneath his armpits. Sarah braced her boots against a crossbeam, wrapped the rope twice around her forearms, and hauled. The burn in her shoulders was immediate, fierce, but she pulled harder, teeth gritted, refusing the memory of failure that clawed at her mind. Inch by agonizing inch, she dragged him upward. The bridge screamed in protest, planks splintering beneath her knees. When his chest finally cleared the edge, he collapsed forward onto the walkway, breath ragged, blood smearing the wood. Sarah rolled him clear of the worst breaks, then sat back on her heels, lungs heaving. For a long moment, only the wind and the river spoke. He pushed up slowly, eyes never leaving her face. "You pulled me from the spirit's doorway," he rasped, voice rough as river stone. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "Bridge was about to send you there permanently. Who did this to you?" He wiped blood from his palm onto his buckskin shirt, the fire in his eyes hardening. "My own blood. My sister's boy. Caleb." The numb came out like a curse. "He wants me gone. Wants the last piece of land I swore to keep." Sarah felt the chill deepen, colder than the canyon wind. She had saved a Comanche warrior from a white man's betrayal, and in doing so, had just stepped into a fight that was no longer his alone. Sarah eased the mare to a stop beside the stranger, his weight heavy against her, as she half dragged, half carried him away from the crumbling bridge. The canyon wind still howled, carrying the faint smell of blood and river mist, but the immediate danger had passed. She got him into the saddle in front of her, his body sagging yet rigid, with the pride of a man unaccustomed to being carried. They rode slowly back up the switchback, the horse laboring under the double load, until the ranch lights, few as they were, flickered into view. Sarah's mind raced. A Comanche on her land, wounded and hunted by his own kin. Whatever storm this pulled in, it was already here. She settled him on the porch, fetched water from the pump, and cleaned the torn palms while he watched her with dark, unreadable eyes. "Name's Jacob Blackfeather," he said finally, voice gravelly from the strain. "You got a name? Woman who pulls warriors from the jaws of death?" Sarah wrapped the wounds with strips torn from an old shirt, her movements sure from years of tending stock and mending her own cuts. "Sarah Hawthorne, this is my place. You'll stay till those hands heal enough to hold a rifle again." He started to protest, but she cut him off. "No point arguing. Night's coming, and whatever cut you loose ain't done hunting." Days turned into a wary truce. Jacob was slow to trust, slower to speak, but pain and fever loosened his tongue by the fire. He told of the great Comanche raids long ended, of watching the buffalo herds vanish under white hunters' guns, of raising his sister's orphaned boy, Caleb, after soldiers burned their camp. Sarah listened without pity, sharing coffee strong enough to strip paint, and in return, spoke of the wagon trail that took her family. Fever, shallow graves, promises broken by death. The house, silent for so long, began to hold voices again. The low rumble of Jacob's stories, the crackle of pion in the stove, the scrape of his knife carving a new handle for her broken axe. Jacob's strength returned fast, forged in harder fires than most. He fixed the corral fence without being asked, his movements precise despite bandaged hands, and showed Sarah how to read the wind shifts before a storm rolled down from the San Juans. She taught him the white man's way with cattle, though he laughed at the idea of fencing grass that once belonged to no one. At night, they sat on the porch steps, sharing a tin cup of coffee, watching stars wheel over the ridge. For the first time since burying her boys, Sarah felt the house breathe, felt something close to peace stir in the hollow grief had left behind. But peace on the frontier never lasts. Riders were seen on the far hills, 2 hard cases from Durango, the kind that hired out for dirty work. Word drifted in from the trading post. Caleb was telling folks his uncle had gone mad from old battles, wandering off in confusion, and he was only trying to bring the old man home. Sarah heard the lie in every syllable when the storekeeper repeated it. She checked the loads in her Winchester, oiled the action, and watched Jacob sharpen his knife by firelight, his face carved stone. "He'll come," Jacob said quietly, eyes reflecting the flames. Blood doesn't let go easily when land and money are involved. One dusk, as Sarah rode in from checking the herd, she spotted fresh tracks cutting across her lower pasture, boot prints and shod hooves heading toward the canyon. Her stomach tightened. Caleb wasn't waiting any longer. She spurred the mare hard toward the house, dust boiling behind her, knowing the storm had finally broken. That night, thunder growled over the mountains, and rain lashed the windows like buckshot. Sarah barred the door, Jacob at her side, both listening to the approach of hooves in the mud. The betrayal was coming home. Lightning flashed, illuminating 3 riders at the gate. Caleb in the lead, face twisted with liquor and rage, flanked by the same hired guns. Sarah's hand closed on the rifle. The quiet days were over. The rain came down in sheets, turning the yard to mud and hammering the tin roof like rifle fire. Sarah barred the door with a heavy timber, while Jacob loaded shells into an old Henry repeater he'd found in the barn, his movements quick despite the healing cuts on his hands. Lightning lit the room in stark flashes, showing Caleb's silhouette at the gate, hat brim dripping, flanked by the 2 hired men who'd ridden in earlier to check on the widow's stock. Sarah knew better. Their eyes had lingered too long on the land, on Jacob. "Open up, Aunt Sarah," Caleb shouted over the storm, voice thick with whiskey. "Just want my uncle. He ain't right in the head, wandering off as he does." Jacob's jaw tightened. "He calls me uncle now, when he needs a witness to believe his lie." Sarah cracked the door, just enough to level the Winchester. "You cut him loose on that bridge, boy. Ride out before this storm swallows you too." Caleb laughed, cold and mean, and signaled his men. They spread out, torches flaring to life despite the downpour. Flames caught the corner of the hay barn first, orange light leaping against the black sky. Bullets thunked into the log walls as Sarah slammed the door shut and dropped the bar again. Jacob dragged the table across the floor for cover, motioning her down. "They want fire and lead. We give them neither easy." Sarah fired through a loophole, the recoil jarring her shoulder, and one torch dropped into the mud with a hiss. The siege tightened. Caleb's men circled, shooting out the windows, glass shattering across the floorboards. Smoke seeped in from the burning barn, thick and choking, carrying the smell of scorched hay and fear. Sarah reloaded by feel in the dark, counting shots, while Jacob crawled to the back room and returned with powder and shot from her husband's old chest. "We hold till dawn," he said, voice steady. "Comanche fought worse odds with less." Sarah nodded, but doubt gnawed. The barn roof collapsed in a roar of sparks, lighting the yard where more shadows gathered. Caleb had ridden to town and brought back 6 hard cases, promised a cut of the land. The house was surrounded, flames creeping closer. They retreated to the root cellar beneath the kitchen, pulling the rug over the trap door just as boots kicked in the front. Sarah's heart pounded against the dirt floor, while voices above ransacked the rooms, furniture splintering, Caleb cursing the empty beds. "They're here somewhere. Tear it apart!" Jacob pressed a finger to his lips, then pointed to a narrow crawl space he'd found earlier. An old mining vent the prospectors had dug decades back, half collapsed, but leading toward the ridge. Sarah lit a stub of candle and handed him the knife. "If we wait, we burn," she whispered. "We crawl." They squeezed into the blackness, earth scraping skin, the muffled crash of axes overhead driving them on. The tunnel narrowed, roots snagging clothes, air stale and close. Sarah pushed forward, rifle dragged behind on a rawhide loop, every breath tasting of dust and desperation. Behind them, the house groaned as fire took hold. Her home, the last thing tying her to the life she'd known, going up in smoke. Jacob's hand found her ankle in the dark, steadying her when a timber shifted. They emerged at last on the uphill side of the ridge, rain still lashing, the ranch below a glowing inferno against the night. Sarah stared down, chest tight, but Jacob was already moving. "Horse is in the upper corral. They won't have found him yet." She followed, legs burning, the crackle of flames fading behind them. Dawn was still hours away when they reached Thunder, the old gelding snorting at the smell of smoke. Sarah swung up bareback, pulled Jacob behind her, and kicked hard for the high trail. Hooves slipped on wet rock, mud flying, but they gained distance. Below, shouts rose as Caleb discovered the empty cellar and the tunnel mouth. Torches bobbed in pursuit. Sarah leaned low over Thunder's neck, wind whipping tears from her eyes. "They'll run us down before light," she said. Jacob's arms tightened around her waist. "Not if we make the canyon first. The bridge is the only way across, and it's waiting." If stories like this one, raw, real, straight from the dust and fire of the old frontier, keep you coming back, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now. It means more folks get to hear them, same as the word used to spread around a campfire. Now the chase was on, and the rope bridge loomed ahead like judgment itself. Thunder snorted and lunged along the narrow canyon trail, hooves slipping on wet shale as dawn bled pale light over the ridges. Sarah leaned forward, gripping the mane, Jacob's arms locked around her waist, while pursuit thundered behind. Caleb's voice rising above the rest, cursing men and horses alike. The old bridge loomed ahead, its ropes black against the gray sky, swaying like a drunkard in the dying wind. Sarah felt the chill of recognition. This was the same span where she had pulled Jacob from death only weeks before, and now it stood as the only choke point between escape and a bullet in the back. She urged Thunder faster, the gelding's sides heaving, knowing the horse could not outrun fresh mounts forever. They hit the bridge planks at a gallop, wood groaning under the impact, ropes creaking as the structure took their weight. Sarah glanced back. Caleb and 4 riders burst from the tree line. Rain sawed hard, faces twisted with fury and greed. Bullets whined past, splintering planks and singing off rock walls. Jacob twisted in the saddle, firing the Henry one-handed, the sharp crack echoing down the gorge. A horse screamed and went down, rider tumbling, but the others fanned out and kept coming. Halfway across, Sarah felt the bridge lurch violently. A main rope on the uphill side parted with a sound like a shotgun blast, strands whipping free. The walkway tilted hard, planks ripping loose beneath Thunder's hooves. Sarah hauled on the mane, trying to keep balance, but the horse panicked, rearing as another rope frayed and snapped. Jacob shouted something lost in the roar of the river below, grabbing her coat to steady her. The bridge buckled again, tilting them toward the abyss. Caleb reached the near end, leaping from his horse and charging onto the swaying span, revolver drawn. "End of the trail, old man," he yelled, face contorted, eyes wild with the certainty of victory. His remaining men held back at the edge, rifles up but wary of the collapsing structure. Sarah slid from Thunder's back as the horse bolted forward in terror, disappearing onto solid ground beyond. She and Jacob backed toward the center, rifles raised, the gap between them and Caleb narrowing with every creaking step. The confrontation exploded fast. Caleb fired first, a bullet tearing splinters near Sarah's boot. She answered, levering the Winchester smooth and steady, winging his shoulder. He staggered but kept coming, hate driving him forward. Jacob stepped in front, knife flashing from his belt, meeting Caleb in a brutal clash of steel and fist. They grappled on the tilting planks, blood slicking the wood, the gorge yawning beneath. Sarah circled, looking for a clear shot, heart hammering as another rope began to unravel with a sickening pop. Caleb broke free, slamming Jacob against the hand rope, trying to pitch him over. "You should have died the first time, you red savage," he snarled. Jacob locked arms with him, muscles straining, boots scraping for purchase. Sarah lunged, rifle butt cracking against Caleb's knee, dropping him to one knee. For a moment, the three stood, locked in a deadly triangle, wind howling, bridge swaying like a pendulum. Then the final rope gave. The entire structure buckled with a wrenching groan, planks falling away into the whitewater far below. Caleb's eyes widened in sudden terror as the floor dropped beneath him. He clawed for the remaining hand line, but his weight dragged the last supports free. Sarah and Jacob threw themselves flat, grabbing a cross rope that still held by a thread. Caleb screamed once, arms windmilling, and pitched backward into the void, falling, until the river swallowed the sound. The bridge hung by one frayed strand now, swaying violently over empty air. Sarah and Jacob clung tight, breath ragged, staring down at the rushing water that had claimed another life. A distant rifle shot cracked from the ridge above, an old neighbor, drawn by the gunfire, picking off the last of Caleb's men and scattering the rest. The fight was over, but the cost lay heavy in the silence that followed the fall. Sarah closed her eyes, the echo of Caleb's scream ringing in her ears, knowing some debts were paid in ways no court could ever settle. The broken bridge hung in tatters, one lone rope still anchored to the canyon wall, while the rest lay scattered on the rocks far below. Sarah and Jacob eased back from the edge, boots scraping loose gravel, the neighbor's rifle shots fading as Caleb's last men scattered into the pines. Dawn finally broke cold and clear over the San Juans, painting the river silver and the wreckage red. Sarah stared at the empty air where Caleb had vanished, the echo of his refusal to take their hands burning colder than the morning wind. She had offered mercy, and he had chosen the fall. Jacob stood silent beside her, breath steadying, the old warrior's face unreadable except for a flicker of something ancient. Sorrow, perhaps, for the boy he had once carried on his shoulders across Texas plains. They rode back slowly, Thunder picking a careful path around the smoldering ruins of the ranch house. Blackened beams jutted like bones, the barn a heap of ash, yet the corral fence still stood, and a few head of cattle lowed from the upper pasture. Sarah's chest tightened at the sight. Everything she had clung to these long years reduced to smoke. But the weight felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the fire had burned away more than timber. Jacob dismounted first, surveying the damage with practical eyes. "House can be rebuilt," he said quietly. "Land stays. That's what matters." Sarah nodded, swinging down stiffly, knowing he was right. The land had outlasted worse. Word spread fast through Durango. Caleb's body washed up downstream 2 days later, neck broken on the rocks, and the whispers started. The widow and the Comanche had lured him to his death, settled an old score with Indian trickery. Men who once tipped their hats now looked away at the trading post, and women crossed the street. The sheriff came out once, asked questions with his hat in hand, but the neighbor told what he'd seen, armed men firing on a homestead, and the law rode off without charges. Still, the doors closed. Isolation settled heavier than before, yet Sarah and Jacob worked side by side without complaint, clearing charred debris, salvaging what iron and tools the flames had spared. Spring came early that year, snowmelt swelling the animas and greening the valleys. They rebuilt a small, new cabin of fresh-cut pine, roofed tight against the wind. Jacob showed Sarah how to braid rawhide into strong lacing for the furniture, and she planted wildflower seeds she'd saved from before the fire, tough varieties that pushed through rocky soil. He taught her fragments of Comanche songs for mending the spirit. Low chants carried on the evening air, while coyotes answered from the ridges. Sarah hung the Winchester above the new mantel, barrel cleaned, but never loaded again. Some ghosts, she decided, were best left unfed. One crisp morning, they returned to the canyon with fresh hemp rope coiled on the pack mule, tools clanking in the saddlebags. The old bridge anchors still held firm in the rock. They worked in steady rhythm, Jacob testing knots with the sureness of a man who had crossed rivers under pursuit, Sarah hammering pins and laying new planks cut from fallen timber. Sweat stung their eyes, hands blistered anew, but the structure rose solid, wider, stronger, meant to last. When the last board was nailed, they stood at the center, wind whistling through the ropes, the river singing its endless song below. Jacob rested a calloused palm on the handrail. "Bridges break," he said. "Men rebuild them. That's how we outlast the storms." Years passed quietly on the ridge. Travelers used the new bridge without knowing its story. Stock thrived in the pastures, and the cabin filled with the smell of coffee and pine smoke. Sarah and Jacob grew older together, two survivors from worlds that had once warred, sharing the porch each evening as the sun bled out over the mountains. They spoke little of the past. Caleb's name never crossed their lips, but the silence between them carried understanding deeper than words. Sarah would sometimes catch Jacob gazing at the horizon, eyes tracing old raid trails now overgrown, and she knew he carried his dead the way she carried hers. In the end, the land kept them. They planted more flowers, wild and stubborn, and the cabin stood firm against wind and snow. Sarah never remarried, and Jacob never returned to the reservations. They were bound by something fiercer than blood, by the rope that had held when all else failed, by the choice to reach out when letting go would have been easier. On quiet nights, when the stars wheeled cold and bright, Sarah would rest her hand on the scarred rail of the mended bridge and feel the frontier's hard truth. Salvation rarely comes clean, but it comes to those who keep building anyway. There you have it, the story of Sarah Hawthorne and Jacob Blackfeather, two souls forged in loss, who found strength in the unlikeliest bond, proving that sometimes salvation rides in on the hand of a stranger from the other side of the divide. In the end, they didn't just mend a bridge, they rebuilt lives on the ashes of betrayal and grief. What about you? Would you have reached out across that chasm the way Sarah did, knowing the cost? Or do you think some divides are meant to stay broken? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. Thanks for riding this trail with me tonight. If this one hit home, share it with someone who needs to hear it. More stories from the dust and fire are waiting. Stick around. The next one might just change how you see the frontier. Until then, keep your powder dry.